Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is for you Friday, April 17th, 2026. I really have to think about that harder than usual to try and get that right. We are now in Deadwood, South Dakota, having spent the day in the Black Hills and driving around and seeing the sights, and made it all the way to the edge of South Dakota here. We're in snow for the first time in the trip. And, it was apparently much warmer here a few days earlier. But interesting little town, can we say? Anyway, fantastic day out touring. More yet to come as we make our way out to the West Coast. And one more show for the week. And that gives me the weekend. We got some really, really long drives coming up for the weekend. And that's fine. It's good for me because I'll be able to do some extra recording and try maybe to get a little bit ahead and have more shows prepared for you next week. It is, it's working out better than I thought it would. I'll say that much. But the microphone experiment continues. This right now, right here, as we speak, is the Yeti microphone. I'm handheld. I have no idea how that's going to be working out. We're in, as I mentioned, we're in Deadwood, South Dakota. We'll talk a little bit more about that at what will be the end of the show later on. It's another one of these temporal displacement shows. But nice little hotel room. But as everything in Deadwood, South Dakota is a hotel and casino. And there's a casino of sorts in every hotel, and there's a hotel in every casino, I suppose. It's really overwhelming, to say the least. A nice hotel room, some nice amenities. One thing that is not in this hotel room that is in every other hotel room I've ever been in, pretty much everywhere, with very few exceptions, there is no desk in here. You will find no desk in your room at the hotel and casino, at least not in Deadwood, South Dakota. And it occurs to me that it's probably the case even in Las Vegas, casino capital of the USA. Although occasionally there are business conventions there. I guess they just figure, you're probably not here for business if you're in Deadwood, South Dakota. So anyway, they got lots going on to make you comfortable and show you a good time. But in terms of setting up at a desk, that's not going to happen. Anyway, we have an interesting show for you today. Some interesting surprises, some voices you're not used to hearing, and all giving extra color to the trip, I think. So that, and also you'll have extra cursing probably around the Scott Anderson household as he realizes there's only 2 stories being read in this show, which looks like it might run well over an hour, maybe as long as an hour and a half. And yet there are 2, maybe 3 links that can be used for this. So I will say this, Scott specializes in embellishing the list and finding other things that we should be talking about. And some of the things that we should be talking about, but that I can't bring myself to actually read out and discuss at length on the air, but just to let you know that I am aware of the fact that they happened. There's the crazy story from out of Virginia, of course, where former Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, I don't know what happened. I haven't read the articles. I don't think I can bear to read the articles, but killed himself, killed his wife, left his teenage children who were at home at the time, orphaned, and presumably we unravel some of that in the days to come. And I guess I'll just make some mention. I also see that Tony Gonzales, Republican of Texas, will finally resign under his cloud of controversy. Though I would guess, I don't know whether anybody's discussed this explicitly or not, but the reason he's been holding on and all this is the razor-thin Republican majority. They cannot afford his resignation. But once it became clear that Eric Swalwell would have to resign, and did, in fact, announce that he would, then it became safe for Tony Gonzales to do so and save his fellow Republicans the embarrassment of having him around. So I imagine he was holding on waiting for somebody, some Democrat to resign, die, disappear into thin air, whatever, that would finally justify his letting go as well. Any number of other things we should be talking about, but won't be. Ceasefire allegedly negotiated between Israel and Lebanon, or I suppose between them and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Trump accounting for his temporary ceasefire and counting it his 10th war solved. Any number of things that I'm sure are concerning you. But the weekend is coming. So why don't we instead get to our somewhat traditional Friday, totally off the rails, totally different kind of show presentation. Oh, one note before I roll the tape here. A gentle reminder that of the temporal displacement that comes along with editing together shows like this. The first story was recorded a day ago, I guess, yesterday, which would, for me right now, be Wednesday, reacting to, well, you'll hear all about it, but Tom Edsel's piece in the New York Times, which, in the recording, I address it not only as being from today, which it isn't because now it's Friday, but also I originally recorded it with the idea that it would be included in yesterday's show. But as it turns out, today was such a busy day, there was very little time to do any recording in the car while we were driving. So I saved it for airing today, but yet I introduce it, as you'll hear in a second, as reading the story, referring back to a story that I mentioned earlier today. So let's see. It was written on Wednesday. On Thursday, you heard me refer to it in a different story and say I would get to that later. Then I didn't get to it. And now today, Thursday, I'm telling you that tomorrow, Friday, you will hear me refer to Wednesday's piece, which I told you Thursday I was going to read to you. Got it? I think that's actually it, which is remarkable because it's pretty late and I'm getting tired. And we're in a casino, so, we got a drink or two. I want to turn back also to another topic that I mentioned earlier, and hard to say how much of this makes the air next day, how much waits until the next day after that, but this morning for me, Wednesday the 15th, was marked on social media by people commenting on Tom Edsel's April 14th, that's Tuesday, guest essay opinion article in the New York Times. It's interesting that they qualify him as a guest there. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know what Edsel's status is there. I mean, I imagine maybe he's a columnist emeritus at this point, but wasn't he always kind of a regular feature in the New York Times? Maybe not. Maybe, or was he Washington Post? I don't even remember when his career was. But at any rate, not an unrepresented voice, to be sure. But this one, I think, was sure to get some backlash. The title of it, Why Aren't the Kids Out Protesting Against Trump? And without reading the rest of the article, 15 different nasty things to say about this, including, well, let's see, the much more staid and still correct answer that I saw online on Blue Sky from, I better scroll back and get it right, but somebody saying, they are. Next question. Here we are. It is Lex McMenamin is my best. I'm sorry, Lex, but Lex McMenamin is, well, let's see, a movement-building reporter for The Guardian. I think that probably describes professionally. what's going on here best. And, that's one of the best answers I've seen so far. Why aren't the kids out protesting against Trump? They are. Next question. True, but there's so much more to it, of course, up to and including, one, why aren't the newspapers reading the newspaper? Because the New York Times is certainly at least covered. They haven't given the right amount of seriousness to it, I don't think, but has covered the school walkouts, etc. And maybe it's just the question is a narrow one. Why aren't they out specifically protesting Trump himself? But they're certainly active in protesting all sorts of Trump policies and Trump consequences and Trump culture war talking points. But I guess what he might mean is, well, I've been to the No Kings protests, or at least have talked to people who have been to the No Kings protests, and they skew old. So where are the kids? Well, anyway, I think there's a lot of answers to that, but I also think it will probably be wise first to read all the way through what Tom Edsall has to say, because sometimes the headline doesn't capture it all. But in case it doesn't, I have a few points to make about this, and if it does, well, I may make those points anyway, because I think they're valid. So here's what he's got to say. Mr. Edsall, by the way, it says up at the top, contributes weekly essays from Washington on politics and demographics. So there you go about his regularity in the New York Times. As I was gathering material on the absence of young people at anti-Trump demonstrations, why were you doing that? I don't know. But he had a thesis and he was pursuing it. Fine. I came across evidence of powerful technological forces weakening persistence and cognitive tenacity across the board. Although, are you nodding at them like that maybe? Because I'm like, no, it's not. AI is making kids dumb. That's not a thesis for this. But
No,
but you were saying...
That's what he thinks.
Yeah, okay. All right. What is this in front of us, by the way? This looks like an enormous tire from, it's on a flatbed truck. And it looks like it must be one of those tires from, one of those mining operations vehicles that's so enormous that you need an entire flatbed truck to carry it away, unless it's treading for, tank style. I don't know what this is. No, they look like grindstones to me. No, they are the giant tires. Okay, now that I see one on the side. Okay, I know those trucks exist. I haven't seen any in person, but those tires are big. Okay, Tom, sorry about interrupting your faulty premise. Now back to you. Most interesting, says Tom Edsall, the most immediate danger posed by artificial intelligence may not be the futuristic moment when AI becomes so smart and so independent of human control, in other words, conscious, that it takes over politics, economics, and the social order. I don't know that I have that particular fear in mind, but okay. I was thinking more about they decide that we're a danger to them and they kill us. But I guess it's the same thing. Instead, it may be the current power of AI to undermine persistence, curiosity, and personal effort. This is such an old man thing to say. Encouraging in their place growing passivity and indifference that poses the more proximate threat. Before we get to that, though, let's start where I began, with the question of youth inaction on President Trump, and go on from there. In May 1970, already. So what is that? 56 years ago. In May 1970, President Richard Nixon's frustration with the student protests against the Vietnam War reached a boiling point. You see these bums, blowing up the campuses, he told a gathering of civilian employees at the Pentagon. Listen, the president said, the boys that are on the college campuses today are the luckiest people in the world, going to the greatest universities. And here they are, burning up the books, storming around about this issue, you name it. Today, the United States would appear ripe for a resurgence of student activism beyond the flourishing of pro-Palestinian demonstrations on campus in 2023 and 2024 in particular. We have a president who has directly attacked the finances and the intellectual freedom of colleges and universities. That, only barely registers with the students themselves, honestly. Why aren't college administrators out protesting Donald Trump? they're not. They may be secretly going to No Kings rallies, but publicly they're looking to cut deals with Trump. That's a better question for an article, Tom. We have a president who has directly attacked the finances and intellectual freedoms of colleges and universities, is building the technology for a surveillance state, something the kids are used to, undermines free and fair elections, now something else that kids are used to, and took the nation into an unjustified war with no explanation while causing domestic economic havoc. Again, I'd argue, something the kids are used to. And I guess I can't wait to do my commenting now, because not only are the kids used to it, but this newspaper that your column is in told them it was all normal the whole time. Their entire adult lives, and even their childhood, has been the Trump era, but more specifically the Trump sane-washing era. Although, I did see a very good comment also on Blue Sky and discussion of this earlier, and I hope I can find and credit it correctly. And I think I found it here. This is a good point. Let's make sure. Chica Attack. Chica Attack says, I hate the sane washing too, but I am not sure that kids today are influenced by bad newspaper framing to the extent that they even see it. And I think that's a good point, because they're not looking at the newspapers, that's for sure. But I think it's sort of maybe more by osmosis, in the sense of, well, if they see newspapers at all, it's seeing the headlines. And if the headlines are telling you, well, this is not, are you really going to head out to protest because of bold moves that test the boundaries of old norms or of institutional norms? That's not going to send you out into the street. But more likely, the message they're getting is, well, this seems stupid and even un-American, but I don't know, I guess they got elected or whatever. I mean, nobody's stopping them from being president, so I guess that's not a thing. But they don't remember, they'll look at you like you're crazy if you try to explain to them that Jimmy Carter had to sell his peanut farm, right? Anyway, but a good point. It should be noted, it's probably a mistake to assume that whoever the kids are, that almost anything that they're doing in life and any understanding they have of the world around them is shaped by bad newspaper headlines. That's probably just, good point. All right, but now back to Tom Edsall, who's making bad points. Let's read that. Yes, okay, so there we are. But one ingredient, he says, is missing from, I guess, all of these various things that should be moving you to protest. A substantial anti-Trump youth movement. He just doesn't see it. And I don't know whether he's, specific. It has to be anti-Trump in focus. There's lots of youth protest going on, but it's peripherally about Trump. It's against ICE and the Border Patrol and what they're doing. It's against transphobia and his culture war against their trans friends, etc. They are anti-Trump. They are protesting, but they are not making their protests necessarily about Trump. I don't know. That's not a hard and fast rule either. Dana Fisher, a professor at the School of International Service at American University, tracks the demographics of participants in major anti-Trump demonstrations. In a phone interview, I asked what she had found about the mobilization of students and younger men and women. She replied, "We're not seeing them in the streets at No Kings events." Which again, that's pretty limiting, the No Kings events. And the No Kings events are very much designed for a totally different crowd. It's open to the kids, but it's not kids' style, we'll say. It's not organic to them. Even, I don't understand. They're organized on the internet. I thought kids loved the internet. Are you on Facebook? Yeah. Well, they're not. It's still the internet, but you're from a time when, what's the internet? It's Facebook and a bunch of other stuff. Anyway, she provided the following data about 3 No Kings protests. Well, that'll do it. There's 10,000 of them every time they have one of these things, and they've done it 5 times. But here's some data about 3 of them. Oh, okay. I guess the entire day. I see. At No Kings 1, June 14th, 2025, the median age was 36. At No Kings 2, October 18th, 2025, the median age was 44. And at No Kings 3, March 28th, 2026, it was 48. Clearly, it's getting older. And it's true. I imagine the next argument is kids today, they can't sustain interest in anything or something. But, another good conclusion is No Kings, it was becoming increasingly obvious to the kids, was not relevant to what they were after and what they were interested in. And they got less and less interested. And you just kept saying, let's throw more No Kings at them. I'm sure they'll figure out that it's interesting next time. It will not. The participants in the initial No Kings demonstration, Fisher wrote, were predominantly white, highly educated, female, and middle-aged. It's not as if young men and women are indifferent to President Trump. The spring 2026 Yale Youth Poll found that, quote, younger voters overwhelmingly disapprove of Trump and plan to vote for Democrats in 2026. 57% of all voters disapprove of Donald Trump's job performance as president, including 68% of voters aged 18 to 22 and 72% of voters aged 23 to 29. So, what's going on? I asked a wide range of experts for their thoughts. Some pointed to such structural developments as the explosion in social media usage and public access to artificial intelligence, both of which weaken users' sense of efficacy and agency. Maybe. Those adverse effects are most acute for young liberals, especially young liberal women, suggesting that the political costs of social media and AI will be borne disproportionately by the Democratic Party. I don't know. Richard Brown, that may be true, but I don't know if that's the reason for it. I think it's more along the lines of Republicans will continue and increasingly exploit artificial intelligence to make fake stuff that rallies their base and make Democrats spend all their time trying to debunk AI slop, as opposed to certainly the idea that particularly the young liberal women are sucked in by this technology, I think is upside down. It's the young men more so than the young women, I think. But I haven't done any research on that one. Richard Braungart, a sociology professor emeritus at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs and co-editor of Youth Movements and Generational Politics, 19th to 21st Centuries, argued in an email that over 70 years the United States has undergone a moral and ideological transformation that has created a hostile environment for the liberal activist young. That's certainly true. After the 1960s domination by young people in the political left, the country moved to the political right with the popular presidency of Ronald Reagan, where liberalism, freedom, equality, self-determination, civil society, big government, and the public sector were portrayed as the problem and the enemy. America was to be saved, enriched, and elevated by big business, the private sector, social Darwinism, and economic neoliberalism. In America, Braungart contended, we are now living in an autocratic capitalist utopia that won't allow counter-ideological positions to exist. It is considered unpatriotic in this capitalist utopia to have democratic parties and networks share power. Braungart concluded, there is a widening gap and split between spirituality and materialism in our society today. I grew up in a world of moral and spiritual values. Marshall Plan, USAID, CARE, good government that served the people, which, unlike today, heavily influenced political decisions. Politicians were held accountable for their moral lapses and flagrant violations. Parenthetically, he adds Joe McCarthy, just to give you an idea again of, what era they're coming from. And by the way, I'm noticing another pattern. Not only is he turning to experts on this stuff, and that's not all bad, as we learned in the Pope story. and that all those experts are professors, and that's not all bad either because you are a specialist in your field. And although this isn't bad, it's little telling. They're all professors emeriti, I guess, right? Because everyone's been a professor emeritus so far, I think. And that's because that's who's in Tom Edsel's Rolodex. He's a columnist emeritus. What the hell am I saying? Emirati. I'm thinking of the UAE too much. Anyway, yeah, look, his contacts are old. That's okay. But it's going to produce this, which I think is limited. Anyway, these days, Braungart continues, Americans are living in a crumbling moral wasteland. Oh, yeah. Well, where corruption and raw power politics rule supreme, okay, and are carried out without ethics, morality, personal responsibility, accountability, nor concern for the people, the environment, and a healthy future for upcoming generations. What struck me there was this is what, Republicans used to say all the time about the normal situation that we'd all like to return to. But they were wrong about it. And just like with everything else, like QAnon and their worries about international pedophilia rings, it turns out that they were the ones doing that the whole time. Republicans were railing against Democrats, saying Democrats had created a crumbling moral wasteland where corruption and raw power politics rule supreme and are carried out without ethics, morality, personal responsibility, accountability, nor concern for people, the environment, and a healthy future for upcoming generations. But it turns out that was actually them and their ideas, or at least that they implemented it in ways that we now recognize as true. And it may very well be, as with all of these attacks and all of the gaslighting, that they very purposefully attacked those things, knowing that by the time they got power back using that as leverage, people would be so fatigued of hearing that crap that when Democrats then said, holy cow, look at the hypocrisy. It turns out these guys are actually all about this stuff. Everybody's like, we've heard that. Enough with that. This is tired old crap. Unless, of course, you're a Republican, in which case it's awesome, but we'll reelect you. Or we'll elect a Democrat for a couple of years and then go back. Anyway, back to Edsel. What this suggests is that students and other young men and women are on the cutting edge of technological developments that are almost certain to pull people of all ages into a web of apathy and impassiveness. And I want to point out one more thing about phrasing here, that also a product of Edsel and Edsel's times, but may also reveal one of the shortcomings of this analysis. This is, I think, the second time that he has said students and other young men and women. Which, given that later on my plan is to discuss transgender issues to a certain extent, or at least note that as an issue of concern for young people, that everything is, well, by the way, subtly, by the way, two genders, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, in my day, yeah, just for the record. Jonathan Haidt, a social psychologist at the NYU Stern School of Business. Anytime you got a professor-heavy article, it's 15 minutes of it is everybody's titles. Jonathan Haidt, who has turned the issue of the detrimental effects of social media into a cause célèbre, responded by email to my queries. When I began my research on social media and Gen Z, I focused on the evidence that it increased rates of depression, anxiety, and self-harm. It does, but the effects are substantially larger for young women and for liberals. Young women on the left fell first and fastest in terms of mental health once everything moved onto smartphones and social media around 2012. Interesting. I guess it also parallels the supposed complaint of the young men of the time in their the loneliness epidemic. And I guess if they were lonely because they were retreating into their computers and not interacting socially, that left everyone else that they were supposed to be interacting with lonely as well. But, I mean, it's interesting that there's no mention of, like, the rise of the manosphere at this point. And maybe young women on the left fell first and fastest because they were despairing of what was happening in the world online. Anyway, more recently, Haidt continued. He realized that I vastly underestimated the damage from social media because even larger than the mental health crisis is the diminishment of the human capacity to pay attention, which is driven in part by the explosion of short-form videos since the arrival of TikTok. The average American teen now spends 5 hours a day on social media, mostly swiping through short videos. In political terms, Haidt argued, social media has done more harm to the Democrats than to Republicans, both by weakening their young people, e.g., their requests for trigger warnings and safe spaces. Oh boy, he's mad about that, huh? And also by radicalizing them. They in turn push the party to take more extreme cultural positions, which drive non-college voters to the right. You're making me a Nazi by being sensitive about issues that affect you. Most consequentially, Haidt contended, years of consuming short videos during childhood and puberty seems to disrupt the development of executive function, which refers to the cognitive processes that support goal-directed behavior. Young people who watch a lot of short videos, which is most of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, find it more difficult to do anything that is hard, or that requires deep thought, or that can be only accomplished with persistent effort. That would include political activism, especially action in realms beyond social media. By the way, another thing that makes it hard for anyone to make strides in political activism would be to tell them everything you care about is frivolous and dumb. I'd quit. Haidt's concluding point, I believe that TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts are bringing America a cognitive catastrophe. The diminishment of capability is hitting both sides, but it is the left that most needs its young people to come out and fight for change. Save us, say the boomers. Jean Twenge, a professor of psychology at San Diego State University and the author of the book, Generations, The Real Differences Between Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers, and Silence, and What They Mean for America's Future. And my review titled, Where Was Your Editor? What kind of title is that? She suggested in an email responding to my questions that a combination of factors underpinned the relative lack of youth activism. A key factor is the growth of both depression and pessimism among young adults. You're stupid, the thing you want isn't real, your gender isn't even real, what are you doing, you're dumb because of TikTok, Anyway, where's this depression and pessimism coming from? Well, it's been happening since 2012. So maybe it was the crust of the earth loosening like the Mayan prophecy. It's hard to have agency if you're depressed, and hard to believe that anything you do will matter if you're pessimistic, even nihilistic. And who could be pessimistic or nihilistic being told, you don't even exist, you're not even a thing? Another factor, Twenge noted, may be that the left overplayed its hand. Yes, it's all the left's powerful. Overplayed its hand on controversial issues such as transgender women in sports, equity versus equality, cancel culture, defunding the police, affirmative action, yard signs that don't vote, I'll add that one, and so on, in a way that alienated many young people, even if they were liberal otherwise, that may have turned them off politics and taking action. Time out for a second to call back to an earlier part of this article when they all expressed their dismay at the kids not coming out to defend academic institutions and academia. Why didn't that happen, I wonder? You're all so dumb. I hate that you look at your phones in my class. Pay attention to me. I'm serious. This is my job, right? All of you are so dumb, and your brains are so weak. Oh no, Trump is launching an attack against academia. Defend me. It doesn't work for NATO any better than it works for young kids. Attack them constantly. They're not going to become your allies. They were never going to anyway. At that stage of life, it's still students against teachers, even though you're paying the teachers. But, that's just one of the dynamics of the age at which we send people to college, if you ask me. Anyhow, that's pretty amazing. A growing number of studies of AI are finding that usage adversely affects users. A January 2025 paper, Gradual Disempowerment, Systemic Existential Risks from Incremental AI Development, by a team of 6 researchers, makes this point succinctly. That'd be a great idea to make a point succinctly for either one of us. Even incremental improvements in AI capabilities can undermine human influence over large-scale systems that society depends on. I think that point is lost on me, but okay. This dynamic, they continue, could lead to an effectively irreversible loss of human influence over crucial societal systems, precipitating an existential catastrophe through the permanent disempowerment of humanity. I mean, oh well, I guess F it. Right? Well, are the kids going to... I don't know what they're going to do about that. America could become a nation of the servile. In their October 2025 paper, Impact of AI Tools on Learning Outcomes, Decreasing Knowledge and Over-Reliance, Martin Benedek and Balzas Ziklai, maybe, of Corvinus University of Budapest. Well, that's my issue. And the ELTE Center for Economic and Religious Studies concluded the following bullet points. Uncontrolled use of AI. I mean, is it really uncontrolled at this point? Leads to a substantial decrease in knowledge. The data indicate an effect likely between 20 and 40 percentage points compared with previous years. Open book computer lab setting seems to be among the most exposed examination formats. What? Although psychological models prognosticate, Hungarians, that the whole learning process might be affected regardless of whether AI assistance is available on the exams or not. The reliance on AI tools and attitude toward responsible usage seems to also depend on the discipline. Difficult subjects such as mathematics, which students often perceive as having little practical value, are especially vulnerable to the misuse of AI. So far, by the way, in all these bullet points, no mention of the very large number of articles I keep seeing of colleges essentially mandating the use in certain classes and in certain departments and integrating AI into the curriculum, presumably with the excuse that that's the future and we need to prepare the students, but I think probably also prodded by, well, you're not getting this amount of money from the federal government anymore, but I'm a multi-billion-dollar company. We'll give you money to force the integration of AI into your curriculum.
So that way I don't have to make shoes.
Yeah, right. That was the other big story from the social media. What's the name of it? Allbirds? Or something? I don't know anything about Allbirds, but apparently a shoe company today announcing we're going to become an AI company now. We're just the most amazing pivot ever. This reminds me so much of the .com boom. I'm a failing business. Just put .com at the end of it, and suddenly I think the result was a 175% increase in their stock price. Because fundamentals, everybody. All right. Mental note to try and find that post just to prove it, because you might not believe it otherwise. All right. Where were we? Yes, right. The mathematics thing. Examination of the test sheets indicates that the large majority of students were content to cede control and rely excessively on AI tools. Over-reliance is also reflected in the extreme reactions to the experiment. Even only after a few years of usage, students cannot fathom mastering a difficult subject without the assistance of AI tools. I don't know that sounds like a really super reliable study for some reason. I don't even know what the study was. They gave kids tests and said you can have open book and use AI, and they did. All right. Well, how about don't allow that and see what happens? I don't really understand why they did this. A more recent paper published this month, AI Assistance Reduces Persistence and Hurts Independent Performance, by a team of 5 researchers, not 6, found AI assistance reduces persistence and impairs independent performance. After a brief AI-assisted sessions, 10 minutes, participants were significantly more likely to give up on problems and perform significantly worse once the AI was removed, compared to participants who never had AI assistance. I mean, also, I'm bored of being here. I came here for credit in my Psych 101 class. You asked me to do a bunch of hard things. but with AI, and now I'm supposed to do hard things without it, and I'm tired already. Switch the order. Effects are concentrated among users who seek direct solutions. Persistence costs were concentrated among participants who prompted AI to solve tasks for them directly. Using AI for hints or clarifications did not produce significant impairments. Effects generalize across domains. Effects replicated across fraction, arithmetic, and reading comprehension, suggesting it's a general consequence of AI-assisted problem solving, not specific to any particular task. Now I ask, where is Tom Edsel's editor? What this has turned into an I don't like AI paper, which is fine, but I see nothing here that ties the lack of interest in No Kings protests, specifically by youth protesters, to AI. There's a lot of, AI. I found 18 papers that say AI has cognitive costs. Sure, go ahead. But I don't think you need a great deal of cognitive capacity to say, this is bad and I hate it. And I'm angry enough to protest the person who's bringing it down on my head. Nobody needs to do fractions to figure this out. Trump sucks. Hypotenuse. Oh, now Trump's great. Okay, it doesn't have anything to do with anything. But there's a effing lot of it. And I guess it's important to see how much of this crap he's piled on top of his dumb thesis. Derek Thompson, an author of the book Abundance. I hope that's not where the abundance agenda came from. And a contributing writer at The Atlantic. Oh, I guess that means it is, actually. Reached similar conclusions in a recent Substack essay. How dare you read Substack? Something to do with the internet. How zombie flow took over culture. So much so that, have you ever heard of zombie flow? No, me neither. The algorithmic news feed, from TikTok to Reels, is carefully engineered to organize compulsive short-term videos around the user's revealed interests for the purpose of maximizing the display of advertising squares. Scrolling has a funny way of immobilizing its user, numbing their mind, and producing a kind of disembodied timelessness, which I am beginning to feel from this super intellectual discussion in this article. I now feel disembodied and timeless. Entertainment and tech companies, Thompson continued, have gotten smarter about putting consumers into bastardized flow states that leave people feeling drained and sad rather than challenged and enlarged as selves, and have made it their specialty to remove every friction and keep us floating in the lazy river of the scroll. The lazy river. Oh, kids do love lazy rivers. Lazy river of the scroll. A brand new phenomenon not at all related to mythological lotus eaters in any way, shape, or form. It's the kids today have been a problem since ancient Greece, I guess. Not that it was necessarily kids that got trapped in the land of the lotus eaters, but the phenomenon has always been there, even certainly well before algorithmic advertising. As apathy spreads, the ability of authoritarian leaders in the Trump mold to smash democratic norms and wrest control of elections will grow stronger. Apathy, in turn, feeds on itself. The more action appears futile, I love saying it that way, the more likely opposition to the corrupt exercise of power diminishes or fades away. The notion of Americans as a freedom-loving, can-do people will be replaced by the notion of Americans as submissive and weak. The collapse of student activism and the lack of a thriving youth movement in opposition to Trump, which isn't a real thing, are a canary in the coal mine warning of the deterioration of American exceptionalism, however imperfectly realized, which a vigorous citizenry relied on to make this country great, oh dear, in the first place. Well, it didn't get any better for reading it, I will say that. So a couple of observations on this one. First, as I said, why isn't the newspaper reading the newspaper? Why aren't kids out protesting against Trump? They are. They're just not at the protest movement you selected as the valid one. but also your newspaper, to the extent that the New York Times is Tom Edsel's newspaper, has been telling the kids that this was normal the whole time. However, not all of them are paying attention to newspapers. That's certainly true. But yes, their entire political experience has been the sane-washed Trump era, and who's going to, take cues from the newspaper? Well, Trump is challenging norms. Oh, well, I better engage in mass protest. That's not really exactly motivating. Also, of course, protest is defined in this whole thesis as the old people's no kings protest. Why isn't Tom Edsel calling anybody? I mean, he's not out there interviewing anybody. He does all of his interviews by email and phone because I think he's 85, maybe older. I can't blame him. This is the way that he connects. But that means he's not going to be covering or talking to anybody at any of the school walkouts, whether they're school walkouts about school shootings and the lack of gun safety, whether they are school protests over aggressive anti-trans bathroom rules in the schools, whether they are protests against ICE and Border Patrol dragging people out of schools right in the middle of their class. He's not at those protests. He's not even reading about those protests. He doesn't have to leave the room to read about those protests, but they didn't come up in his Google search. The list that he got from his Google search, or maybe his AI search, was a bunch of books about his thesis about AI. I wonder how that happened. And then, of course, and by the way, I mean, it may not necessarily be his fault that he's not going to connect with anybody at these protests, but the kids at those protests, he might think, well, they're on the internet, I'm on the internet. They're not doing email. They're not even, I don't know how they're communicating. They're not answering texts either, as it turns out. But yeah, I used to think I understood what kids were doing. You can't call them on the phone. You got to text them. But that was a generation ahead of my kids and the kids today. They don't even answer texts anymore. I don't know how you reach them. Discord is how you reach them. Ask Tom Edsel about Discord. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I haven't been using the internet. Why isn't it working? Kids love the internet. No. So, your Rolodex and emailing professors is just not going to get you the youth perspective. It's going to get you a very specific segment of society's answer to that. There's I have an interview with somebody who has kids. Sorry, you got a point to make. Yeah, go ahead.
I do have a point to make. I wanted to comment that no, that I think what they're also missing is that kids today socialize in a very different way than kids ever have before. They socialize online. They don't socialize in person the same way they used to. Some of our kids' best friends are friends that they met online, and they haven't physically met yet. So I think it's kind of short-sighted to think that they are not discussing and mobilizing online too. I mean, I don't know whether they are or aren't. I know that our kids at least one of them, the younger one, is definitely having very active political discussions with online friends. And, maybe that's their protest movement, is stuff that's happening online, the way they socialize, which is very different than what we would have done.
It may just be that we don't see it because it's there. My kids never been really on Twitter, never really been on Blue Sky. I mean, I think they have had accounts, they just don't use them. But they're reading the news or reading the memes about the news in places that I don't even know how to access. I mean, I guess I could figure it out, but I don't care because I don't, but it's just not about my approach to anything. They're having the same discussions I'm having, but in different venues. So what? I don't want to interrupt them. They don't want me interrupting them either, and it's just fine. But yeah, it's a different form, and has to be 100% true that at the time of the Vietnam War protests, the people who are comparatively as old then as Edsel is now, or even younger, but all the olds of the day were, of course, That's not how it's done. It's one thing to protest and say that you think that as a matter of policy the Vietnam War should end, but burning your draft card, that's a government document. You don't think people were saying that's not the way to do it? Of course. And just now the form has changed. As Linda Chapman tells me on Blue Sky, the scolds on Nextdoor were outraged that the kids protested during the school day. I mean, that's where a lot of the organized protest that was visible to the public was happening, school walkouts. And they were outraged that kids were walking out. Old people say to the kids, show us you care about the world. So the kids stage a protest march at school. And old people say, not like that. You can't do it that way. Why not? Why? You're breaking the rules about school. You're walking out. You're truant. School's important. You got to pay attention and learn your history so that we can scold you about not doing it right or whatever. And the answer is, by the way, you and your newspapers that you read, so what am I looking for? I'm not even sure what word I want, but you read so religiously. That's a good term for it. They all say that all of this insanity is a bold challenge to institutional norms. Well, so's walking out of school, right? No, it's not. It's terrible. It's truancy. It's delinquency. You're juvenile delinquents. Not only are you dumb and your gender doesn't exist, but you're juvenile delinquents to top it all off. Now, I want you to come out and protest cuts to the sociology department. Well, I'm not going. Anyway, I just found that to be interesting and weird in a number of ways. And also, I just also have to point out that it should be no surprise that Edsel's starting point is that kids today, they're not doing a Vietnam-style protest, even though, as I mentioned back then, the olds who weren't Tom Edsels of the day, but old to Tom, were saying that's not the way it's done. But kids of the Vietnam era, and when we say kids, we mean 18 and up, and I guess, approaching the age of 18. Why? Draft age. But kids protested Vietnam because Vietnam was killing them and their friends and directly impacting their lives, right? Meanwhile, who's killing kids today? The kids in school of that same age are not threatened, to the extent some of them are protesting the Iran war, no doubt about that, but they are not being drafted into it. But what's threatening kids' lives and the friends of these kids' lives today is ICE, Border Patrol, kidnappings, etc., gun violence in schools, certainly, that too, and transphobia. All the things that are killing them and threatening their lives, they are out there protesting. He just won't give them any credit for protesting it because he thinks they're fake issues. That's insane. All right. This is not strictly news, but it impacts the news. And it's something I've been thinking I needed to go back and share with you more explicitly for a very long time. In fact, I went looking for the original article that I thought I might share with you, and I think the best I can make out from my records, such as they are, is that I had an article about the way Trump was influenced by and still uses the book The Power of Positive Thinking to shape his worldview, but that's understating the case, to shape his worldview, like to actually alter reality in his mind such that his worldview, well, at this point has nothing to do with the rest of our worldviews. And now that he's getting older and everybody sees this as his becoming delusional or suffering from dementia or loss of mental acuity, and this is a bit of an argument. I guess you can make the argument that this has always been the case with him, and it's not necessarily due to his aging or his dementia, though it has certainly given it a different twist. Well, I went back and I looked at what I could make out. I'm sure I put this thing in Pocket years ago, and Pocket is now defunct. And somewhere I, downloaded the records of what was still in pocket when it shut down. But I'm not sure that hasn't helped me find the article. I went looking, and I'm relying on the cookies and cache from old Google searches tell me that when I searched for Trump and the power of positive thinking, I came up with an NPR piece from January 2017. So really early in making the call on this. But this one is in the format of an interview with some experts, and then it's a radio piece. It's an NPR piece, and it's transcribed. And it reads a little clunky because of what the format really is. But I would suggest maybe that you might want to listen to their report and hear it for yourself the way they intended it to be presented. And I also found, though, a piece from Politico. They must, I think, have heard the same thing. And they decided to report on it as well, but although I can't tell what the date is on this. Oh, yeah, this is from October of 2017. They hide the date for some reason in a weird place in this. But this one reads to me like perhaps they had seen or heard the NPR report. So it's maybe the next best thing, and it's formatted in a way that it makes it an easier read and easier to understand when read to you. So I'm going to go with this version instead. But just to set things up, I keep coming back to this and keep thinking how important it is every time we run into one of his delusional things where he just, states something that is, well, it's really not so much when he just lies about what's going on as when he says things like he gets himself into an Iran war and paints himself into a corner and then says, well, maybe it'll resolve it. It'll probably resolve itself somehow. And you can't even begin to fathom how somebody who has stepped into this role could afford to think this way. And I think this might help explain some of it. So this, again, from Politico magazine, way back in October of 2017, they, were doing a little vertical they called Trumpology, I guess, trying to figure this guy out. The power of Trump's positive thinking. And I remember when I saw this, or these articles about this stuff, I got to wondering about it because my recollection of the power of positive thinking was that it was some anodyne self-help book that, was a little bit dated, but, that it didn't really have you couldn't use it to justify the kind of idiocy that Trump is engaged in. And now I'm not sure that that's really true or that it was ever true. But at any rate, it changed my view of what this book was about from something, stupid and useless, essentially, a gimmick to sell books, and turn it into something that's really powerfully dangerous. So The Power of Trump's Positive Thinking is the name of the piece. It's written by Michael Cruz. The subheader here, the president always has believed he could will himself to success. But has he crossed the line between optimism and delusion? So again, another early call on this, but not as early as NPR. 9 months earlier. Donald Trump is a self-help apostle. He always has tried to create his own reality by saying what he wants to be true. And I'm sure that must have triggered you a little bit if you're an old timer or been around the show for a long time. Create his own reality reminds you, of course, of the quote, I think, widely attributed to, now I'm blanking on his name, Karl Rove. Right, that we are an empire now. We create our own reality when we act or something like that, and they'll go on creating their own realities, or Democrats and people like you who live in the reality-based community will study it judiciously, as you will. You remember that whole thing. So it's very triggering to see it here. Like, oh no, we're back to that. Even though Karl Rove doesn't consider himself any kind of Donald Trump fan or supporter, which is wild also. Anyway, where many see failure, Trump sees only success and expresses it out loud again and again. We have the votes to pass a new health care bill, he said last month. This would have been September of 2017, even though he and Republicans didn't then and still don't. And that's true 10 years later as well. We got an A+, he said last week, of his and his administration's responses to the devastating recent hurricanes, as others doled out withering reviews. Remember, he also said he got an A+ on his COVID-19 response. I've had just about the most legislation passed of any president in a 9-month period that's ever served, he said this week, again, back then, in an interview with Forbes, contradicting objective metrics and repeating his frequent and dubious assertion of unprecedented success throughout the first year of his term as the president. The reality is that Trump is in a rut. His legislative agenda is floundering. His approval ratings are historically low. This might as well have been written now. He's raging privately while engaging in noisy internecine squabbles. He's increasingly isolated. And yet his fact-flouting declarations of positivity continue unabated. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, this is almost like it could be written today. And yet it wasn't, of course. It was written in 2017. And what happened, right? He's out of touch with objective reality. He's out of his mind. He doesn't know what he's doing. It's going to be a disaster. All of us in our reality-based community thought that had to be true. He thought couldn't possibly be true because of the power of positive thinking. And in the end, who's back in the presidency? Who's dominated politics for 10 years? Who's rewritten all the so-called rules? Or he hasn't rewritten any rules. He just broke them all and got away with it every single time. And it's starting to, wear on us, I'm sure. But there you have it. It's very interesting, right? Everyone then says, objective reality says this can't go on. It's going on. And it's kept going on. Where were we with this? There's something much more elemental, even than his, his outright lies. Where was it? His fact-flouting declarations of positivity continue unabated. For Trump, though, these statements are not issues of right or wrong or true or false. There are something much more elemental. They are a direct result of the closest thing the stubborn, ideologically malleable celebrity businessman turned most powerful person on the planet has ever had to a devout religious faith. This is not his mother's flinty Scottish Presbyterianism, but Norman Vincent Peale's power of positive thinking, the utterly American belief in self above all else, and the conviction that thoughts can be causative, that basic assertion can lead to actual achievement. That certainly seems to describe Trump to a T. A big giant T painted gold. Trump and his father were both Peale acolytes. The minister officiated at the first of Donald Trump's weddings. And Peale's overarching philosophy has been a lodestar for Trump over the course of his decades of triumphs as well as the crises and chaos. Stamped indelibly on your mind, a mental picture of yourself as succeeding, Peale urged his millions of followers. Hold this picture tenaciously. Never permit it to fade. It was a mindset perfectly tailored for an ambitious builder determined to change the skyline of one of the globe's great cities. Trump, who used this self-confidence to blow right past a series of seemingly fatal gaffes and controversies to win an election last fall, way back when, that polls said he couldn't and wouldn't, in this respect, has been a prize Peale pupil, arguably the most successful Peale disciple ever, which is the sort of thing that he would instruct you to say about yourself. I don't think it's even an argument. Trump biographer Gwenda Blair told me recently, it's a fact. The power of positive thinking, he weaponized it. But now, in the political realm, where the space between spin and truth is parsed constantly and with consequences, well, we used to think so anyway, but this is 2017. It is Trump's very success that has opened him up to questions that simply don't matter as much when he was it didn't matter as much when he was a television star, or opening golf courses, or licensing his last name to steaks, bottled water, or far-flung condominium projects. Is Trump's relentlessly optimistic insistence on his own version of reality an asset, a sign of admirable grit for a politician desperate to score some legislative victories? Or is it a sort of self-delusion that risks embarrassment, or worse, in the highest stakes geopolitical arena? Science, it turns out, has something to say about this. Self-help is a multi-billion-dollar business. Airport shelves groan under the weight of how-to and pick-me-up books, pick-me-up books, churned out by writers who are all essentially Peel progeny. The industry is prevalent in American culture to the point that it has spawned its own subgroup of critics who dismiss it as silly at best and dangerous at worst. That's me. If you are simple enough to buy a self-help book, you may be congenitally programmed to fail. Tom Tiede, Tiede, wrote in 2001 in his own book, Self-Help Nation, the long overdue, entirely justified, delightfully hostile guide to the snake oil peddlers who are sapping our nation's soul. Oh, wow. Positive thinking has garnered such social currency that it also has become a subject of academic inquiry. And though it certainly was not conceived with this in mind, the science of self-help, of happiness and well-being, of specific phenomena called unrealistic optimism and positive illusions, is now in some respects the study of the way Trump thinks and what it could mean for the country and beyond. How can Trump say the things he does? Read the research. In 1988, in a seminal paper within the subject area, psychologists from UCLA and Southern Methodist University wrote that, quote, considerable research evidence suggests that overly positive self-evaluations, exaggerated perceptions of control or mastery, and unrealistic optimism are characteristic of normal human thought. They added that positive illusions may be especially useful when an individual receives negative feedback or is otherwise threatened. They warned, though, of inherent risks and limitations. For example, a falsely positive sense of accomplishment may lead people to pursue careers and interests for which they are ill-suited. 2 years ago, English researchers published an update. People with unrealistic optimism, they wrote, believe they are more virtuous, more talented, and more compassionate than others, less prone to error. They believe that they can control events that are not under their control. They believe that they are less likely to experience future negative outcomes. They have overly flattering conceptions of themselves that are also resistant to negative feedback. Sometimes, they said, all of that can help people like this platform. Well, what does this read? This doesn't make sense to me. Sometimes, they said, all of that can help people like this. Perform well. Gotcha. In conditions of uncertainty and risk, the researchers explained, some instances of optimism lead people to make better decisions by helping avoid more costly mistakes and contribute to survival and flourishing. Even so, it's true only to a point. Excessive optimism, they concluded, can become problematic and lead to poor strategic planning, disillusionment and disappointment, and risky behaviors. Where precisely the benefits of unrealistic optimism and positive illusions end and the drawbacks and dangers begin is nearly impossible to identify, researchers told me. There are just too many variables. A person's web of characteristics, that person's wider environment, the complexity of a situation. There's almost no way to know for sure when a line is crossed between helpful self-assurance and disastrous self-delusion. If there is, I don't know it, said retired Professor Neil Weinstein, who wrote a paper in 1982 when he was at Rutgers University titled Egocentrism as a Source of Unrealistic Optimism. The world isn't that predictable, he said. Donald Trump, after all, is president. He was born into a house that Norman Vincent Peale helped build. Peel's cheery, simple tips allowed Trump's father to alleviate his anxieties and mitigate the effects of his innately awkward, dour disposition. Emboldened, Fred Trump banked hundreds of millions of dollars building single-family houses and then immense apartment buildings in New York's outer boroughs. Peel appealed to the elder Trump, too, because both men embraced conservative, right-wing, us-versus-them politics, an important but often forgotten portion of Peel's M.O. A generation down, Peel appealed to Donald Trump because Trump idolized his father, and because what Fred Trump drilled into his most eager, most ambitious, most like-minded son, be a killer, be a king, be a winner, not a loser, is what made that son so receptive to the teachings of Peel. Born in 1946, Donald Trump's childhood was spent in a house with white columns and 9 bathrooms, and a live-in maid and chauffeur in Jamaica Estates, Queens. Sometimes, when it rained or snowed, he did his paper route from the back of his father's limousine. I guess that explains things today. Earlier yesterday, when you're hearing this, I happened to catch Aaron Rupar's soundbite of Trump reading a speech that mentioned a corner store and then going off on a tangent saying, "What's a corner store? I never heard of it. What's a corner store? But who wrote this? What's a corner store?" Like between that and I don't know the word groceries and I don't know how many other examples. I mean, the guy's just not based in reality, like physically not based in reality, and never mind mentally. Peel, known as God's salesman, reached the peak of his influence in the heart of Trump's childhood, preaching in the 1950s to millions of people on Sundays at Marble Collegiate Church on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, as well as through a syndicated newspaper column, radio and television shows, his guideposts magazine, and a spate of books that were self-help trailblazers. First and foremost, of course, The Power of Positive Thinking, his defining work and wild bestseller that came out in 1952. It offered chapters such as Believe in Yourself, Expect the Best and Get It, and I Don't Believe in Defeat. Whenever a negative thought concerning your personal powers comes to mind, deliberately voice a positive thought, he wrote. Actually, Peel once said, it is an affront to God when you have a low opinion of yourself. I could see this being helpful to some people, but I don't know that it was necessarily meant to be weaponized the way Trump has done. Certainly not. It doesn't seem like it makes any sense that way. But, this will pick up a depressed person. It's an affront to God when you have a low opinion of yourself. Okay, don't commit suicide. All right. That's a nicer way of saying it. Peel was far from universally popular. One psychiatrist dubbed the power of positive thinking saccharine terrorism. Wow, and that was at the time. And during a 1952 presidential campaign, the Democratic nominee made his feelings plain. Speaking as a Christian, the brainy Adlai Stevenson said at a Baptist convention in Texas, I would like to say that I find the Apostle Paul appealing and the Apostle Peel appalling. That's pretty good. But Peel permanently altered the way many Americans worship. His was a precursor to the prosperity gospel espoused today by, say, the toothy Joel Osteen. By repeatedly equating business acumen with piety, uncertainty with religious doubt, and personal and cultural failure with godlessness, Peel and his admirers helped to redefine religious Americans as socially superior winners, Northwestern University English professor Christopher Lane wrote in his 2016 book, Surge of Piety, Norman Vincent Peale and the Remaking of American Religious Life. What Peale peddled was, quote, a certain positive, feel-good religiosity that demands nothing of you and rewards you with worldly riches and success, said Princeton University historian Kevin Cruz. Oh, well, we spent the next 10 years conversing with Kevin Cruz via Twitter and now Blue Sky, right? He's the author of One Nation Under God, How Corporate America Invented Christian America. It's a self-help gospel, the name it and claim it gospel. And for Donald Trump, the attraction to Peele did not diminish with time. Even as more traditional theologians derided Peele as more huckster than holy man, and intellectuals mocked him as a lightweight, Trump, in his 30s, remained a staunch Peele adherent. Peele, then nearly 80 years old, officiated Trump's wedding in 1977. In 1983, shortly after the opening of Trump Tower, Trump credited Peele for instilling in him a can-do ethos. The mind can overcome any obstacle. This is Trump, back when he could speak. So, the mind can overcome any obstacle, he told the New York Times. I never think of the negative. The feeling was mutual. In the Times, Peele called Trump kindly and courteous and commented on a profound streak of honesty and humility he thought Trump possessed. Oh, well, you're wrong about that. Trump at the time was newly ascendant, and the influence of Peele coursed through his aspirations and interactions. If you're going to be thinking anyway, he wrote in 1987 in The Art of the Deal, like that. Well, if you're going to be thinking, can't imagine why you would want to be doing it. But if you're going to be doing it anyway, you might as well think big. That year, Jack O'Donnell saw it firsthand. He started work for Trump as a marketing executive at one of his casinos in Atlantic City. This is the best place in the world to work, and I'm the best guy in the world to work for, Trump told O'Donnell at their first meeting, according to O'Donnell's 1991 book, Trumped. That's the name of the book. The onslaught of Peele-preached superlatives kept coming. I'm America's most successful businessman, Trump said. I'm a winner. I've always been a winner. O'Donnell, though, soon was worried about the pitfalls of such optimism. By 1988, a manic, temperamental Trump was overwhelmed, in O'Donnell's estimation, by the world that he had created for himself. He had piled up accomplishments, acquisitions, and debts. It was too much. He was at the point where image superseded reality, O'Donnell would write in his book. In the same way that he believed a man could retain his hair by willing not to go bald, he thought he could redress the operational shortcoming of a multi-million-dollar company and make it successful by stating and restating that it was. It caught up with him. The early 1990s were a low point in Trump's life as his casinos careened toward corporate bankruptcy and he suffocated under billions of dollars of debt, not to mention the hyper-public breakup of his marriage to the mother of his first 3 children. Trump's credibility and viability as a businessman were in jeopardy. Drawing on Peele, Trump was unswayed, leaning extra heavy on the principal tenet of the power of positive thinking. Think it, say it, and say it, and say it, and say it, in an all-out effort to make it so. It's all going to work out, he said to a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, just as he said this week about Iran. It's all going to work out, he tells the Wall Street Journal. Trump, all but dead, hotter than ever, he told New York Magazine. Hey, we hear that about the United States. It's such a hot country right now. I would have been looking for the nearest building to jump off of, and he just remained upbeat all the time. Steve Bollenbach, the lender-mandated financial fixer who helped Trump avoid personal bankruptcy and lasting business humiliation, once told biographer Tim O'Brien, I never suspected that he lost a moment's sleep. Trump tapped into Peele, he would say. I refused to give in to the negative circumstances, he said in a 2009 interview with Psychology Today that is littered with particular language of Peele. I never lost faith in myself. Being tenacious is part of my personality. He was well-spoken once, although he did sound funny. Defeat is not in my vocabulary. He mentioned Peele. Now nothing is in his vocabulary, though. He mentioned Peele in his most famous book. He was, Trump said, a firm believer in the power of being positive. Someone asked me if I thought I was a genius, he wrote in 2009 in Think Like a Champion. I decided to say yes. Why not? Try it out. Tell yourself that you're a genius. He practiced this tactic even as the scorecard of his business dealings recorded something other than genius. after 3 more corporate bankruptcies for his casinos, as well as a variety of other business failures. From Trump Mortgage to Trump University to name-branded condo projects stalled and killed by the Great Recession, Trump kept proclaiming success. "I've done an incredible job," he said in 2013. "It was time to run for president." Norman Vincent Peale, the great Norman Vincent Peale, was my pastor, Trump told the audience at the Family Leadership Summit in Ames, Iowa, in July of 2015, barely more than a month into his run. "The power of positive thinking," he said. I guess that's what he's saying. Peale said. So, okay. "The power of positive thinking," he said. He said this in between having consultants and, no. I don't know. This is just poorly laid out as far as I can tell. Or maybe I'm just exhausted. But, all right, the power of positive thinking, he said. He said this in between having consultant and pollster Frank Luntz ask him the same question twice. "Have you ever asked God for forgiveness?" His answer, "I'm not sure I have." For Trump, thanks to Peale, that's not primarily what religion was for. "Affirm it, visualize it, believe it, and it will actualize itself," Peale had written. And last year, around this time, 2016, in the roiling wake of the tape of Trump bragging about his ability to grope women with impunity, with pundits saying he would lose and lose badly, with more and more women accusing him of sexual harassment and members of his own party, and even a man who would become his chief of staff suggesting he should drop out, Trump did not do what almost anybody else would have done. Everybody else, there's literally not another politician in history who was facing what he was facing and didn't not only stop running the race in question, but recede from public life altogether. But that's not what Trump did. Trump did what he's always done. He doubled down on Peale 101. Polls said he was not going to win. "We're going to win," he told Sean Hannity 3 weeks before the election. "We're going to win the great state of Michigan," he said at a boisterous rally at 1 a.m. in Grand Rapids on Election Day. "And we're going to win back the White House." Trump does not often share the spotlight, but it seems likely, based on his decades of testimonials, that he might give Peale at least some credit for the astonishing, highly improbable arc of his life. Trump's current job, in some ways, is in some ways a confirmation of Peale's core principles. He visualized, it actualized. From a scientific perspective, though, Trump is an incomplete experiment. For decades, researchers have attempted to quantify the range of outcomes of positive thinking, looking for objective ways to correlate internal belief and external reality. There are really strong benefits in terms of undertaking activities that are difficult and for which the true odds would be daunting if you paid attention to them, Jonathan Brown told me. He was the SMU psychologist who was one half of the research team behind the 1988 paper on illusion and well-being. He's now at the University of Washington. He gave examples of starting a business or getting married. Other researchers I talked to brought up health outcomes. In situations of, for instance, dire cancer diagnoses, the prospect of survivability can get a boost from optimism that's statistically unjustified. Positive thinking can motivate an individual, Wellesley College psychology professor Julie Norum said. Also, other people, at least initially, often respond positively to it. If I present myself to you as somebody who's upbeat and really confident, chances are pretty good that initially you're going to believe me. You're going to say, wow, that person's really got it together. That person's really going to go someplace. And that's a huge advantage in life. Then there's the but. 1T. Thank you very much. For most people, said Norum, who specializes in optimism, pessimism, and personality psychology, for most people, there's a point at which, if that's all they bring to the table, it breaks down. The question is where that point is for Trump. He is so clearly not most people. In the words of Mitch Horowitz, He is the kind of Frankenstein monster of the philosophy, or he is a kind of Frankenstein monster of the philosophy of positive thought. It's an interesting way of putting it. Trump, said Horowitz, a self-help expert himself and author of One Simple Idea, How the Lessons of Positive Thinking Can Transform Your Life. Trump seems to be an example of at least the short-term destructive gains that you can attain through self-help, through self-assertion, and people's willingness to believe what they think that they see. Short-term. Trump's version of his own reality, some insist, ultimately will crash against something more real. In the end, I think reality is like gravity. It exerts its own force, said Peter Wehner, W-E-H-N-E-R, a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and a consistent conservative critic of Trump. The power of positive thinking can only carry you so far. He offered an example. I could use the power of positive thinking and convince myself that I'm going to be the starting center for the Golden State Warriors, Wehner said, but it's not going to happen. To carry this metaphor a small step forward, though, Trump is actually currently the current starting center for the Golden State Warriors. That reminds me very much of another thing we refer to all the time, the madness of King George, right? Where they're trying to cure him of his at least temporary bouts of, I guess, insanity. And the doctors are saying, I've dealt with a lot of patients who are so insane, and they think they're the King of England. The problem here is this guy actually is the King of England. that does make it tough. Well, so yeah. So to carry this metaphor a small step forward, Trump actually is currently the starting center for the Golden State Warriors. He's definitely not Stephen Curry. Stephen? Is he Stephen Curry? She's Curry. Is he Stephen?
I don't know.
I don't watch enough basketball. I mean, he's outrageously famous, and I don't know. Oh, well. Sorry. I've been driving around the country for 20 years. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, Wehner granted that, and his supporters, he said, probably think he's scoring 25 points a game and averaging 11 rebounds. This, though, is just it. Nobody ever has had more success convincing himself and others that he is a success even when he's not. He's certainly the most successful person in the world at that, right? So, I mean, you just said it yourself. I'm the most successful person in the world. Yeah, but only at convincing yourself that you're successful. Well, am I sitting in the White House or am I not? You have a point, sir. So, nobody ever has had more success convincing himself and others that he is a success even when he is not, and thus turning that stated sentiment into actual, tangible, considerable accomplishment. And if he could do that, it seems fair to ask whether gravity or accepted laws of politics apply to him at all. What exactly is unrealistic about Trump's optimism? It's gotten him this far, said Blair, the biographer. He has a lot of reason to believe that something like the power of gravity doesn't apply to him. The science here hits a ceiling. Researchers do their work in controlled settings to obtain empirical results. America under Trump, meanwhile, is far from a controlled setting. And if it's difficult to determine the location of that line between self-assurance and self-delusion in the former, it's impossible in the latter. Scientifically speaking, the Trump presidency is uncharted territory. And again, this is 10 years ago. The degree of positive thinking that we talk about in the paper bears no resemblance to what President Trump is exhibiting on a daily basis, which would be an extreme form of what we talked about, said Brown from the University of Washington. What we were really looking at was sort of, should you know what you really like? Is a person best served by knowing what they are really like? Oh, I see. Should you know what you are really like? Okay. Not what you really like. I really like ice cream. Well, that doesn't help us. What are you really like? Is a person best served by knowing what they are really like? And I think that the answer to that is no. You're better served believing that you're a little bit better a little bit better than you are, but not wildly. Brown cited the opening salvo of the Trump administration, the fight over the size of the turnout at his inauguration. He somehow saw a crowd that was larger than it actually was, or factually was, and said so. That, Brown said, isn't self-confidence or assertion. That's bizarre. That isn't within the normal range of human behavior, he said. No psychologist would say that's adaptive. There is a lot to like in the idea of the power of positive thinking. Ed Daner, one of the country's leading researchers of happiness, told me. But of course, it must be grounded in a degree of realism. And where's that dividing line? The dividing line, Daner said, is when the delusions become dysfunctional. And where is that? Where the distortions become strong enough that they make one act irrationally, impulsively. He said, I think we're there. The biggest problem with the Norman Vincent Peale version of positive thinking, said Wellesley's Norm, is that you can't know when you've crossed the line. Because if you're accepting that as a philosophy, you're already defining out of the picture any negative thoughts. And one of the ways in which Trump is so extreme is the extent to which he does that for himself. So he's at the center of this positive world, and anything negative that impinges on it is evil, bad, and forbidden. That certainly seems to explain almost everything he does and every person that he turns against. He won't see the line if and when it ever arrives. As for the rest of us, I mean, if we're all blown up in a nuclear war, Norm said in 2017, then that's going to be a pretty clear line. True, but no one will be around to see it. Wow. Okay. Just keeping in mind, that's an October 2017 article. I also think you really should spend some time. I'll give Scott the link to include the link to the NPR piece, because it seems to me very, very likely that Cruz, I'm sorry, it wasn't Kevin Cruz that wrote the article, but Mike, it is Cruz. Oh, interestingly enough, I thought I was confusing Kevin Cruz and the author of the article, and I was. It's just that he's Michael Cruz instead. So I thought, oh no, it couldn't be Cruz. Well, it was. Anyway, it seems plain, I think, that he has heard the NPR segment or read the transcript of it, because they cover everything. And I'm glad he did it too, because, originally I thought it was going to be a much easier read than reading the transcript. And I will say, every once in a while, his particular phrasing threw me for a loop in a live read. But at any rate, I really wanted to get that on the record. Friday is as good a time as any to do something like that. It's a nightmare for poor Scott, because he's only got like 2 or 3 articles to links to work into a write-up. But between this and the opportunity to comment on Tom Edsel's piece, and to allow for the first time, I think, on the show, extended comment from production staff right in the middle of the show, might make for a good Friday treat for you. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. Now, back to my regularly scheduled travel log. We wind up our night in a snowy Deadwood, South Dakota, where I have to tell you, we're staying, where are we? At the Landmark Hotel and Casino, because everything's a casino. And they're all hotels and casinos. And I can't say much about the casino, but I can tell you, we ate some dinner here, and they're apparently revamping their menu. And I guess the whole place is, you know how casinos are, especially all these all-video casinos. Very, mostly elderly clientele, I guess. Revamping their menu, and so like today, in the last couple of days, are the first days of the rollout of this menu. So they're doing a fantastic job. New chef. Rambo. No.
Rambo?
Yes. He told you twice, like the movie. Rambo. And you couldn't believe it, because the first time you said Rainbow. And I have to tell you, we're not that unlike the rest of the clientele here. What's your name? Rambo. Rainbow? Rambo. Grambo. Well, it's Rambo. He said like the movie. Anyway, fantastic stuff. And our wonderful bartender, Jackson, who made, I guess, the best, what was that? Frosted lemon drop-ish sort of thing? What's it called?
It was a berry lemon drop martini.
You bet.
Substituted the...
Oh, right, with an acai blueberry vodka. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, it was fantastic. It was wonderful, but it is in fact snowing. It is April. Well, for me, April 16th. For you, you'll be hearing it on Friday, April. Yeah, 2 days ago in the 80s. So it's very much like everywhere in the rest of the country. But I'm sure it'll all resolve itself. It always works out.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
And that will do it for today's show. Thanks for hanging in there with us this week. It's been a real learning experience for us and possibly for you too. I don't know. We'll see how it goes, and I think we can keep this up during the next couple of weeks as we still travel around the country and make our way back to you. We will see you on Monday.